Channel. My name is Yvonne, and this channel is all about bringing you news and content surrounding childhood sexual abuse. I am somebody myself that society considers a survivor, and basically that's a term that's given to anybody that has survived a traumatic experience that is basically here living to tell the tale. But I see myself as somebody who's more than a survivor. I am an overcomer. I have not let labels define who I am, and I have not let my experience define who I am or what I want for my life. So that is why I share on this platform my experiences, stories that I come across, to give voice to the survivor, to let people know that there is hope. So today I wanted to talk to you about loneliness. This is something that has happened to many survivors, including myself. It's interesting from the conversations that I've had what loneliness has meant for different people and how it's affected their life. And I just want to share with you a little bit of how loneliness affected my life. Right from the beginning of my experience at the age of 9, when I was sexually abused by my dad, loneliness, self-isolation just became something that I inherited along with my experience. I found it very, very hard to be around my family at times. I would go up to my room. I cried a lot of the time because I felt scared, because I felt lonely, because I felt ashamed, and I didn't feel there was anybody I could talk to about this. What would I say? I didn't have a name for it. I didn't know what was going on. So right from the very beginning, I realised that sexual abuse was for me going to be a very lonely experience. When I was 10, my dad told me if I ever told anybody, I would go deaf, dumb and blind. And this is something a lot of paedophiles, predators do to try and buy the silence of their victim, because they know that what they're doing is wrong. And they use threats, they use bribes, they tell you all types of different things. So that solidified that silence, that self-imposed isolation that I lived in, because I was scared of the consequences of telling anybody what was happening to me. That soon changed though as the years went on, and I became very wary about what was going on with me. I became quite broken by my experience. And at 13 years old, when Childline did come to my school and were able to educate and bring awareness about what sexual abuse was, I had some knowledge of it, and it wasn't too long afterwards I was able to tell somebody about it. The journey though from there to where I was 20 years down the line was a very lonely experience I had to walk for myself. Right from the beginning of speaking out and being taken into care, the outward loneliness started to now become a reality, in the fact that my family ostracized me for speaking out. They turned their back on me. It became a me versus them scenario, and I felt very angry about it at the time, because I hadn't done anything wrong. I felt I was being punished for something that I had no control over. And I spent predominantly a large amount of the care system by myself, having to navigate it by myself. It's funny how you can be around people but still feel lonely. And yes, I spent a lot of time doing destructive things when I was in care. Had quite a temper. I drank, I smoked a lot to deal with a lot of the negative feelings I was dealing with, but also having to no one there to talk to. No one there I could relate to. Obviously, therapy and different things were provided for me in care. None of my peers in care talked about why they were in care, even though later on we all knew that, some of us went through sexual abuse, physical abuse, neglect, different types of things. But at the time as teenagers, we didn't talk about those experiences. So it was a very lonely time. And not having a family network around me, because for 13 years I lived with a family, and to be kind of ostracized, really compounded the loneliness. And I just didn't trust anybody from that point. I thought, that no one was worth trusting, and that again helped fuel the loneliness. I left the care system, and I was a single parent and had my first flat. I felt lost. I didn't know who I was. I had no sense of my identity. I still had a lot of perceptions about who I was based upon my experience of going through childhood sexual abuse that had now become ingrained in me. And I was nowhere near dealing with sexual abuse or dealing with what it meant for my life at 19 years old. It was only like 3 years later, at 22, when I had my first nervous breakdown and I hit rock bottom, that I was able to do that. But one experience really stood out for me, and that was when I was 19 years old. I was given a book by somebody, and it was by a lady called Joyce Meyer. I don't know if you've heard of her. She is a preacher, Christian lady, who is a worldwide speaker, best-selling author. You know, she's somebody who speaks very publicly about her experiences of a lot of things, and that could be to do with her sexual abuse, which she went through from the age of 5 to 18 years old. It could be to do with negative thinking, thoughts, getting yourself back on track. She is somebody that has used her experiences for the betterment of others. And when she was talking in her book about how sexual abuse affected her life, for the first time at 19 years old, I was like, wow, this is somebody who understands me. This is somebody who is saying things that I have never been able to say, that has been able to put her thoughts out there and articulate it in such an amazing way. And even though I was far from being able to acknowledge what I had gone through, it sparked something in me. It really did, where I thought, wow, here is somebody else like me. Because for a long time I felt like an alien. I felt like so disassociated from myself, you know, and it's something I struggled with for a lot of years, even after I read her little book. But I just felt, wow, there's somebody who's helped me to connect some of the dots that I felt I've never been able to connect. And that was empowering to me. That was my first experience of peer empowerment. She's somebody who had a similar experience to me, and I felt empowered by her. As time went on, I still struggled with the loneliness. I still struggled with being around people. I had periods where I wouldn't be in work because of depression. I just wanted to be by myself. But I realized sometimes in being by myself and in having that self-imposed isolation and loneliness wasn't a good thing, because I would fill that time doing destructive things like drinking too much, smoking weed, filling myself full of things that weren't good for me, making bad and poor choices, which I had to unlearn and start to make better choices. I realized it wasn't good for me. So one of the ways I started to break that loneliness, isolation, was by speaking to someone. This is really important, and I feel that if you are somebody that is at this stage, that you need to know that it's important to have the right person to speak to. What I realized about going through so much internal pain is that you have a tendency, I had a tendency, I should say, to outpour to the wrong people. A lot of these people didn't care. If they cared for a while, after a while, when I wasn't getting better quick enough, they started to lose patience. Speaking to people who couldn't hold anything in confidence, another big mistake. When I'm saying to you to speak to someone about it, it's about having the right person to speak to. And I can only tell you from my mistakes, one of the best ways to speak to somebody actually is to speak to somebody who's bound by a confidential agreement. And that could be somebody who is like a counsellor, a therapist, well, that could be, you know, speaking to helplines. These are places or people who are bound by confidentiality, meaning that what you tell them, they can just not go and blab to somebody else. And I would say recommend this if you are wanting to speak to somebody, as good ways of being able to build those trusted connections, those trusted relationships. I know for a lot of people that therapy and counselling for them has not been great because they found that they were re-traumatized. Everybody has their own individual experiences. Only advice I can give on that is that you need to do your research. When you're speaking to a counsellor, first thing you really need to know and look out for is if they have experience of working with those who have been through traumatic experiences like PTSD, childhood sexual abuse, to find out if they have that kind of knowledge. There is no point, and this is just in my experience, of speaking to somebody who has no experience of this, because they're not going to be able to understand or to show empathy, because empathy and sensitivity is something that a therapist needs to have in order to be able to support somebody that's gone through childhood sexual abuse. Obviously they have their knowledge and their background in doing that, but that is something that you can't be taught. That is something that can't be learned. So for me, I've had good experiences with therapists and counsellors. I've had one particularly bad experience with a male counsellor back in about 2007, 2008. And that put me off counselling therapy for a while. He was bound by certain ethical practices, but he didn't really follow them. Not everybody's going to be great, but I feel that if you were to ask questions, how long you've been practicing, have you worked with survivors of childhood sexual abuse, I think by asking these questions that it should be able to help you think about what will be right for you in this part of your journey. Also, peer empowerment is an absolute major thing in being able to break isolation and loneliness. As a matter of fact, if it's not joint number one with therapy and counselling, I would say it's number one. Being amongst people who've had similar experiences as you can be completely empowering. As I shared with you earlier about Joyce Meyer and her book and how that empowered me and helped me as a 19-year-old, there is a saying that you pass on what you learn, and I released my book Daughter Arise in 2010, which is my autobiography about my experience of going through sexual abuse, how it impacted my life, the challenges and different things that I went through and how I overcame it. I really believe that books by others who have had similar experiences can help to empower you and help you to be able to break out of certain challenges that you might be facing. Also, I wrote this book, which is a peer empowerment workbook for survivors of childhood sexual abuse, and it's an awareness book. It's about education, awareness. It has workbook exercises in there that you can engage in. It has things that have helped me, things that I've experienced that have been good and bad. It's really about empowering the survivor. You might not be at a stage where you're ready to tell anybody what's happened to you, to talk to anybody about your experiences. And this book really is about laying the foundations to help you to find your voice. Or there might be issues actually that you may be struggling with. In this book, I cover a lot of things. I'm somebody that has had a 30-year journey. I will leave a link to both of my books in the description bar below, and you can check them out for yourself. Books, peer empowerment books by survivors, are majorly helpful. Also, support groups are really good. For the last nearly 5 years, I've been running a support group down here in South London for survivors of childhood sexual abuse, and we get survivors from different parts of London, even outside, that actually attend the group. And it really is about looking at solutions and sharing solutions to things that we have found challenging. We don't really talk about the ins and outs of our experiences of going through sexual abuse, what actually happened, because a lot of us have other avenues like counsellors that we have attended or are attending to deal with the more intricate issues of that. But we come together more for support and to be able to find solutions to some of the challenges. I also did a TED Talk on this about peer empowerment and the power of listening, and I will leave a link to the TED Talk in the description bar below. But peer empowerment is so major in helping a survivor, I believe, come through their experiences, because who better to help somebody than somebody that has been through it themselves? When you're in that self-isolation and loneliness, and when you're in it, like when I was in it, I thought nobody would be able to understand me. There's nobody around me that I can talk to. There's nobody that's talking about these issues. To see somebody else who is talking about it openly, about those very things that have been going around in your head for a long time, it's like a breakthrough. It's like it leads to a breakthrough. I found that for myself. I've had people who have read my books who have told me the same thing. In reading my book, it's helped them to find their voice. It's helped them to break out of certain perceptions they had about themselves. Peer empowerment, I believe, is an essential part of the journey to being able to empower the survivor. You don't have to attend a support group. As I said, maybe you're not even at a stage where you've even found your voice. You can join support groups online, or groups online where they have particular threads and they discuss particular subjects, and you can join, and they have moderators, and you can join and give your thoughts on a certain subject or something that you're particularly struggling with. In essence, Facebook groups that deal with support are all about trying to provide a platform to empower the survivor. So you can have a look at those as well. But the main thing I want to tell you today is that you don't have to be in isolation by yourself. You don't have to be in loneliness by yourself. There are things that you can do to break the loneliness. There are places and people that can support you. And I understand that at the essence of self-imposed isolation and loneliness is because of trust, because we have been hurt by people who have done things to us. Loneliness can be really, really hard, especially when you've been rejected by your family and you've had to deal with a lot of things by yourself. It can be very, very hard to trust again when you've been humiliated and betrayed, but it can be done. If you want to contact me or ask me anything, please contact me at info@daughterarise.org.uk. Please visit my website www.daughterarise.org.uk. I write a blog on there called Hope for the Future, again talking about different topics and experiences that are there to empower the survivor just by sharing knowledge, sharing my experiences, things that I've come across. Be sure to check out my website, and I hope that you are able to start to think about taking those steps to empowering yourself to break the isolation and loneliness. And I shall see you in the next video. Take care.